Hello and welcome to the Business of Authority. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And today we're going to talk about the books that changed our lives. Ooh. So dear listener, this is off the top of the head. We are trying to not overthink it and come up with books that changed our business, but also, that's part of your life, but also just life-changing books from whenever.
Yeah, and that's really different than like, what are the best books? Oh, you should read this book. That's not what we're saying. But because I think we both agree that sometimes the right book you come across it at the right time, and you start to scratch your head looking backwards going, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't read that.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes you read a book, it's just the wrong time. Like you already know it. Like it could be an amazing, amazing book. Like for example, I think Obviously Awesome by April Dunford is just maybe the best book on positioning that's available. It's so well written, so good. It's for a very specific reader. And when I read it, I was like, this is a great way to say this, but this is just like, yeah, this is right. It didn't change my life at the time because I read it too late, right? Like if it had existed earlier, if it had existed in 2014 maybe or 2010 and I read it then, it would have been like, what? Like mind blowing.
Well, yeah, Flawless Consulting by Peter Block is like that for me. I mean, it's a brilliant book. And if you're just getting started in consulting, that thing has the legs. I think the first one was written in the 80s sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, it wasn't life-changing for me because I was already doing those things. And it was more like, oh, I see these things I just did because they're part of my personality. You can actually learn them. Right. Yeah, that's great.
Right. That's a great example for me too, because you recommended, and I read it after I stopped consulting and I was like, oh, I wish I'd read this 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So it didn't change anything for me, even though it's an amazing book.
Right.
Yeah. If you're just getting started in consulting, definitely read that.
I know you've got to have one from like when you were a kid.
Oh, that actually was a much easier list. So in terms of how do you want to go back and forth? You kid?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, why not?
All right. So there's some obvious ones like Lord of the Rings. I suppose that's an obvious one for my generation. And similar, Phantom Tollbooth and yada yada. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, all that stuff. Like a super duper game changing for me as a little kid. Like I could not get enough of those. But there's one that probably not a lot of people know about that to this day I could reread and probably get like more out of it than I did when I was little. It's called Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid by Douglas Hofstadter. And it is mind-bending. And I read it when I was, I think I was in junior high. I tried to read it. I did not, the whole third section of it was over my head at the time. I should really go back and read that again. But if I had to summarize it, it's about the inherent paradox at the core of every system, that every system breaks down at some edge case, that there's no such thing as a complete system. And that includes language, it includes the alphabet, physics, mathematics. It opened my eyes to that frameworks for thinking are useful, but not absolute. I was a very absolute black and white kind of kid. And
no.
Can you believe it? So that book is just absolutely, if I had to pick the best book ever written, that might be on the list. Because not only it's a doorstop. This thing has got to be 700 pages.
Wow.
But it is also hilarious. Like the fact that it is just chock full of hilarious puns and allegories. And it is just perhaps, if I had to pick Desert Island book, this is it for sure.
Wow.
Just so great.
That's
so
high praise.
Great. Yeah. Another one as a little kid. We'll run through these because they're probably not that useful to people. But just if you want to know more about why I'm so weird, I was super into martial arts as a little kid, as I am now. So I read a lot of stuff back then, including The Art of War, which I'm sure is imprinted on my DNA at this point. I couldn't tell you what's in it. I remember some basic things from it, but it's just a bunch of stuff from Alan Watts, very Zen Zen Buddhism is where the martial arts came from. So a lot of that, it's kind of infused into that. And I got really interested in that in like late elementary school, early junior high. But I've got one self-help book on the list though, which is called Psycho-Cybernetics by a plastic surgeon named Maxwell Maltz. Did you ever read that?
No. Sounds familiar though, but no, I don't think I read it.
Yeah, it's late 60s classic self-help. It's not Power of Positive Thinking, which I have some problems with, but it's more like so he was a plastic surgeon, and he noticed that he could improve someone's appearance and they would still see themselves the old way. And and the book is about his experiences. It's not scientific, but it's his experiences exploring what to him was a surprise. It's like, well, could you fix my nose? All right, I fixed your nose. Like, how come you're not happy now? And it was just so common that he started to like keep track of it and drill into it. And again, it's been so long ago that I don't remember even if it would hold up. Probably doesn't even hold up today. It was probably like an infantile presentation of the material because I was so young when I read it and it had an effect on me. But the premise of it, that your self-image can create, I go beyond, it does create the boundaries within which you imagine yourself operating. So yes. I'm not like, oh, just think and grow rich. Like, but I think there is some truth to self-fulfilling prophecies and speaking things into reality, not for some energy of the universe reason, but because when you start talking about things and start thinking about things that are bigger or more expansive, people help you. It's not this magic power of the universe helps you. It's people help you because you're talking about this thing, and other people who support your mission or your goal or whatever, they pitch in and they make connections. And it's not magic or rocket science even. It's just like, oh, you start talking about, you can speak things into existence, not because of, it rewires your brain, but because it does rewire your relationships and your social network. And you just sort of, people are natural matchmakers. So anyway, that's the way I think.
And how old were you when you read that?
Little. I mean, this would have been maybe 7th grade.
Wow.
It was like, oh, interesting. It made sense to me. It was like, yeah, I don't know. And as someone now who's, 500 years later, coaching people, I mean, it's on display every day.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
there's
definitely
something going on there. Yeah, did I have anything else? There's a book, award-winning book called My Side of the Mountain that one of my uncles gave me that was huge for me at the time. It's about a kid who kind of ran away with permission. Like his parents weren't searching for him. They were like, "Oh, you want to go and live in the woods on granddad's property on the mountain? Fine."
Fun.
Yeah, I was the protagonist. Like reading that book, I'm like, this is me. But when I had kids, I warn you, when Cooper got to be about the age that I think I was when I got that book, I looked for a copy and it's hard to find. And I finally got one and I read it. I'm like, this isn't that good. It's really not that good.
But he might think it is if he's the right age.
No, he was absolutely not interested in it in the least.
Okay.
Couldn't have been more bored by it. My it was much larger in every way in my memory. And it was a little bit disappointing. But at the time, that book was like, I was like, oh, the idea of, I wanted to be in charge of myself so bad when I was a little kid. I just don't, did you ever detect that I don't like people telling me what to do?
No, I never got that about you.
Yeah, this book really spoke to me. And, the kid kind of like lived off the land. He was like clever and brought all these little tools with him to do the things and had the problem solving and all that stuff all by himself, which is pretty common even with Disney movies. It's like kid on their own saves the day or whatever. The parents always immediately die and then
it's a myth. I mean, it's the classic, structure of a myth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was cool, but not that great.
I'm feeling like I'm laughing because you read all these smart books. So and I read, whatever was assigned in school, and I loved reading. But I got to say, the books, and I'm going to call it books, but it was a series that changed me. It was Nancy Drew. And I mean, talk about simplistic, but I grew up in a small town in Connecticut. Like, there weren't role models of women doing things out in the world. And here was this, I think she was a teenager. I remember she had a cool, little roadster, which makes me wonder if subliminally I was channeling her when I got my first roadster. But I just love that she was a detective and she figured things out and she was independent and she did things with her friends and she solved crimes and mysteries. And it was and some of it was scary, Nancy Drew and the, I don't know, the haunted house. I forget what all
right.
But
the secret of the cave.
I know, exactly. Like the Hardy Boys, probably. But
I was a Hardy Boys kid.
Yeah. And so there was this thing about going to the school library on Friday and taking home 2 or 3 Nancy Drew books for the weekend. And I can't remember if I read all of them, but I usually, when I started one, I usually finished it. Like I would just sit and read the whole thing. So yeah, to me, it changed me. It wasn't like an awakening so much as it was, well, I'm going to be like that.
Right.
I just don't know how, because I don't know anybody who's like that. I didn't know any women. And I had one uncle who was kind of like that, a traveler living big in the world. So I saw him, but I didn't have any women that did that in my world. So yeah, that made all the difference for me.
Well, I read, here's a picture. Here's an image for you. Probably 5th or 6th grade, Jonathan Stark. Mom drags us all to the beach, and me sitting fully clothed under the trees.
Under the tree. I knew you were going to say under the tree.
Yeah, as far away from the water as I could get, reading Star Trek paperbacks, right? So I definitely had plenty of, which I wouldn't say garbage, but that was, those were, I didn't just read smart books.
It's okay to read for fun, We don't always have to learn something deep from everything that we read.
I don't know if they were life-changing, but I did idolize Mr. Spock, so maybe they were.
To this day.
Yes. Any other kid era books that come to mind? I love the Nancy Drew poll.
Yeah, no, that was really it. It's like I mean, I had 5 or 10 minutes to think about this, but I didn't, nothing came to mind. I remember reading Sylvia Plath and the Bell Jar, but it didn't, it was an interesting book, but it wasn't life-changing. Just,
right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, let's instead of let's move on to something that maybe is maybe a little more applicable to the dear listener. Books that we read later as adults that were business related, or maybe not business related. Could be self-helpy. Could be no limits. But what were the things at so you say 20s or older that you read that were like, oh my God, this is affecting my actions.
Yeah, so the big one for me was, I think the name of it was Servant Leadership, but it had servant leadership in the title. I can't remember the author. It was a man, and he's since passed away. But I read that when I was in a big consulting firm, and I felt like I wanted some self-education on leadership. And I just read, oh my God, whatever the leadership book du jour was, I read. This one wasn't. I think it had been written quite a while before I picked it up. But there was something about, I know what it was. I was struggling inside the organization because I'd never really supervised people other than at McDonald's when I worked there. But I was struggling with this idea. I was in an organization where they didn't want you to spend time with people, grooming them, because that wasn't resulting in immediate business, right? And so I was always pushing against that, and I didn't understand how to put that, the way I was feeling, in perspective, because I had an organization that kept telling me that was wrong. And then I read this servant leadership, and I went, oh, that's it. And the basic crux of it is that we lead by serving. We don't lead. It's not about our ego. It's not about us. It's about how we can serve the people, and that includes organizations that we lead. And so the minute I realized that's what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to be of service, maybe not the best, but I'm trying. That's what I'm, learning. And I'm butting my head against this belief that leadership is about you. And so, yeah, it changed everything for me. And in fact, when I did start my first company, it was a very potent part of how I thought about treating the people inside the organization and how I wanted our firm to be seen and experienced from the outside.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, we'll have to link that up in the show notes when you dig it up. I did a quick Google search while you were sharing that, and I didn't see a definitive title because it seems like a pretty popular category. So.
Yeah, I can find it. I remember the guy. When I see his name, I will remember it. But he's been gone a long time. I think he might have passed in like the 90s maybe. But I think the book might have been written well before that.
So that was the big one?
Yeah, that was because I can kind of remember the before and the after with that book.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So for me, this is going to surprise probably no one, but for me, the before after was like Value-Based Fees by Alan Weiss. I was like, because I was in that same place. I was in a similar kind of place where I was like, I'm stuck. I have recognized that hourly billing is nuts, but what the heck am I supposed to do? Right. So I was like sitting in that tension and had quit my job to figure it out and literally stumbled. No one recommended it to me. I literally stumbled on that book in a physical bookstore.
Really?
And, yeah.
I don't think
so
I knew
weird.
that. Okay.
So weird. Maybe the universe is sending energy. And I was like, there was I was in the business section because we just moved. I remember exactly where I was. We moved back to Rhode Island and I was in the I don't know if it was a Barnes & Noble or a Borders, but I think it was a Barnes & Noble in the Providence Place Mall. And I'm standing in the business section like, what the hell do I do now? And that popped out. And he's got a bunch of books. I don't know why I picked that one in particular. I guess is the title that was the main problem I was having, is like, what do I do instead of hourly billing? And that book became my Bible for like 3 years. I just read it, reread it. Years. I mean, if you looked at my copy, it's just like every page is highlighted, every page is covered with notes, every blank page in the back is full of notes. And yeah, it was just like insane. It was like exactly, it's like, what do they say? The teacher appears when the student is ready or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was huge. And I have I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I have 2 companion books that were super important, but probably wouldn't have mattered if I hadn't read that one. One of them is How to Measure Anything by Douglas Hubbard, which isn't about value pricing. It's not about professional services. It's just about how to measure intangibles in a business context, which is the first big problem you stumble across when you stumble on value pricing. It's like the first big problem is like, well, okay, but how do I figure out how much something is worth in order to base a price on it? And that answer is in Douglas Hubbard's book, How to Measure Anything. So it's described somewhat in Weiss's book, but nowhere near the level of specificity of Hubbard's book. And then another book that was really important to me was Book Yourself Solid by Michael Port.
Yeah.
Which was more is a humbler take on the marketing aspects that are shared in Value-Based Fees. So like the Weissian, nobody wants a humble consultant thing just never sat with my personality. And but I was like, all right, so it felt like in the Weiss book, he was sort of advocating to be cocky or something. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. So what's the option? There's got to be an option. And that was what I found in the Book Yourself Solid book, where it was like the posture of service. Like that was gigantic for me.
I love the way that you like bookends, the way you said that, because I like Weiss's books, but his, in your face, cocky is the perfect word, approach just never sat well with me either. And it works for some people, works really well for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Michael Port book really balanced that out. He in that book, he had so much humility about it, but servant leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, it's a service business.
Ooh.
Serve, right? Okay. It's so that really fit. That was, I mean, it's in retrospect, it's like duh, but it took me reading that book to be like, oh, I'm here to help people.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'm just not a status games guy. Ellen is the kind of person that would advise buying not just a Rolex, but the most expensive Rolex and the most expensive pen and the most expensive car. And does that project success to your buyers? Of course it does. But I'm just wasn't going to play that game. So I was like, all right, what's the path for me, someone like me? And the Port book completely provides that. It's like, you don't need to have the flashiest watch. You just need to help people.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's just funny how we learn these things as we go. Just like it sounds like you and I were doing the same thing in the sense that we're thinking about this stuff. We're just not sure how to put it all together. And then we read a book and we go, oh, that's what it is. I get it now. Yeah. So I had this book that I think I read it. It's funny. I'm not sure exactly when I read it, but I think it was when I was running my firm. And I've always loved to read biographies. And this one is called Desert Queen by Janet Wallach. And it's about Gertrude Bell, who I had never heard of. And sometimes she's been referred to as the female Lawrence of Arabia, which I actually find highly insulting. She was the one who did it, and he copied her. If you read the book, you will see. But what was so interesting to me is she was a high-born British woman who had adventure in her soul and couldn't figure out what to do with that. So she studied, she traveled, she lived with the Bedouins in the desert. She was just such an intrepid adventurer at a time that even though she was a higher class woman, if I can use that awful expression, even though she had more resources than most women of her day, it was still highly, highly unusual to be so adventuresome. And I remembered I got so much courage from that book. Like I was reading about what she would do in the desert and how she was making her tea with the Bedouins. And she was involved in the negotiations after World War I about how they partitioned so many countries up in ways that led to World War II in some cases. So it was just fascinating with history and with her. And I just, every once in a while, I read that book quite a long time ago, but I will think of her with her, she always had this hat, very British woman with her hat. And she was like, she made me think of not Mary Poppins, but Mary Poppins in the sense of being determined and she's ready to go and she's a professional and she's studied and she wants to learn and she wants to serve. So yeah, I absolutely loved reading about her.
Classic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. It's, and a total introduction for me, having never even heard the name, which is wild.
I hadn't either. I don't even remember I think I picked it up at a bookstore. So it must have just, something about the cover appealed to me probably.
Cool. Well, from that, I hesitate to mention my next one because it's so pedestrian in comparison.
Hey, listen, I read Nancy Drew, so,
Well, the next one is, for me, it was a game changer, and it was called E-Myth Revisited.
Oh,
and
sure.
It's a classic.
Yeah.
And I read it. It's just one of those things. I read it at the perfect time. And I think I'm pretty sure it was around 2003 or 2004, because I was working inside of a firm and I had a particular role, and of course, everyone had a particular role. And I still was shedding what we typically refer to as the employee mentality. I still had it and didn't necessarily, I definitely had this when I was at Staples, which was my only corporate job. Had it really bad at Staples. And then I still had that kind of, I'm the only one doing anything of value around here. These salespeople and managers and so forth are just mooching off of the value I'm creating. And they're billing me out at $150 an hour, and I'm only getting paid a salary that equates to like $70 an hour or something.
Mm-hmm.
And right around that time, I read E-Myth Revisited, which I don't even know if I would recommend to people listening, unless you have that attitude that the person who's writing the code, or the person who's building the marketing calendar, or the person who's designing the web page, or the PowerPoint document, or whatever, the person that's doing the hands work, if you think they're the only person who deserves to be paid, you need to read this book.
Oh, that's a good distinction, because it felt like it was really written for people that want to grow companies.
There's that. That wasn't the thing that changed me, though.
Yeah.
When I read it, the main example that sticks in my mind was of someone building a bakery, which you pretty much, I could argue this, but generally speaking, you have to hire people. And it felt like the moral of the story was like, create systems and hire people to run the systems for you. In a digital world, I think the calculus is very different, but that wasn't the thing that really changed me. The thing that changed me was recognizing the 3 different personality types that are important inside of a business. There's I think he calls them the entrepreneur, the technician, and the manager. And they all create value. They all have their roles to play. And there's supposed to be friction between between all 3. It's not supposed to be this permanently harmonious thing. Like, yes, the overall business should move forward, but not without friction. Like, there's going to be tension. Well, friction maybe is the wrong word. There's a tension between what the entrepreneur wants. They are going to do certain things. Well, I don't need to describe the book, but if you think that labor is the only thing that creates value, that's a great book to read to change your mind about it.
Yeah, that's good.
It's the anti-Marxist, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and I read it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I still liked it. I wouldn't describe it as life-changing, but I thought it was a good book, and it reminds you of the importance of documentation. Figuring out a system and then documenting it to make it work. I mean, the way it's structured is a little like, folksy, but
that was charitable.
Yeah. But yeah, the intent behind it I thought was really good. And listen, we all read a lot of books. Sometimes you take one thing from it. That's all you need. It makes it a good book for you.
Yeah. I would say the best books on my shelves I could look and see, and the ones I remember, just really almost always just one thing that made the whole book worth it, with notable exceptions like Value-Based Fees, which had tons of stuff. But usually, like How to Measure Anything, one thing. Book Yourself Solid, one thing. E-Myth Revisited, one thing. But one huge thing that came at just the perfect time.
Yeah. I'm thinking, I'm going out of order here because I'm pretty sure I read these books before Desert Queen, but from a business standpoint, there's 2 books that are kind of inseparable for me. One is The Professional Services Firm, which is David Maister, and the other is Trust Matters by Charlie Green and Maister, and a third author whose name escapes me at the moment. And we've had Charlie on the show,
right?
Twice, I think. And I read The Professional Services Firm in preparation for creating my own, because I knew a lot about how one was run from what I learned at the firm I was with, but there was a lot I didn't know. And especially I didn't know about, well, if I don't have all that infrastructure, what can I do and what should I do? So that it's like a textbook, really. And if I remember rightly, because it's been a long time, it's still on my shelf. If I remember rightly, it's geared towards larger firms because that was his specialty. He would primarily work with, large global firms. But there was stuff in there that I used that made sense to me. And a lot of his stuff was about measuring things and what to do in which order. And I think in Trust Matters, I think that was the book where it wasn't any one voice, but where they talked about a number, and I want to say it was 80%. If you're not getting, this is for firms, if you're not getting 80% of your business through referrals, stop marketing and go do business development.
I mean, that's funny.
Yeah. And you can argue about the number and all that, but they were very clear about that. So both of those books were really instrumental in sometimes reaffirming what I already thought, and other times just opening my eyes to something I hadn't considered.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, that's sort of the kind of book we're looking for here. Yeah.
Exactly.
There's another one. We're going down the list for me anyway. This next one was super helpful to me, and it did change my behavior to the point where I literally went out and bought a physical filing cabinet. But Getting
I
Things
know where
Done
you're
by
going.
David Allen. Yeah. I don't remember. I mean, I remember this was part of me setting up my own business. I had no systems that was handled for me at the firm, other than the ones I built that were digital, which was just one or two. So I didn't have anything written down. I didn't really, I knew how to do my job. I didn't know how to build the business that I was trying to build. I wasn't even sure. I had only a vague idea of what it would look like. So the thing about that book was, it was like, it's almost like making a list or doing an inventory of your, air quotes, inboxes, and having a place, have an inbox for anything that's incoming. So like whether it's on paper, whether it's bills, whether it's reminders, digital things, whatever they are, like where are all your inboxes? Where do you have to place your attention? Like pretty much on a daily basis, you got to stick your nose into this inbox and minimize them, systematize them, come up with strategies and tactics for triaging them and plowing through them. And it's pretty straightforward, keeps it pretty simple. A big fan of those traits. And so it really resonated with me. And I felt like, especially at the time when a lot of stuff was still on paper, this would have been like 2006, there was still a lot of stuff on paper. There still is, but there was even more back then. And I had just so much stuff sitting in a pile, and then that just like weighs on your brain, and it turns into the swarm of bees around your head. It's like, I'm forgetting something. And that really helped. I don't know. I think it stands up pretty well. I've had some people read it recently.
Yeah, I just read it.
Yeah. Well, what was your take on it, having read it recently?
Oh, I really liked it. I mean, I thought the book felt like it was written for people who have a corporate job. Like there was definitely that slant. It had been updated for 2015, so it had more of the system stuff in it. But what I got out of it was that I realized that even though I was getting a lot of things done, there were still aspects of my work that I hadn't codified in the right way. I hadn't. Yep. So the big thing for me was making a list of projects and looking at them every week. Like I was holding a lot in my head. And the minute that I emptied my head of those was when I did the 5-day Genius Challenge. Like all of a sudden I looked and went, oh, I got everything under control. And I looked at my list and I went, I don't want to do those today. I want to do something fun. And so I did that. So yeah, it definitely holds up in my opinion.
Cool. What else you got on your list?
Let's see. That was for, The Big Leap, which I've talked about on the show, Gay Hendricks. And that was this idea, it was the first time that I'd seen Genius Zone in print and realized that this thing that I thought I just like coined myself was actually from him. And I loved the book because it wasn't just the Genius Zone, because I've been talking about that for a while, but it was this idea that we are the ones who keep ourselves from making these next leaps. And he really goes through some exercises that you can kind of get out of your own way. And I thought I was pretty savvy on this. I mean, hey, I coach people on doing this, right? But it was really insightful and helpful and what's the word I want to use? Inspirational, really. And I'm not just talking about the Genius Zone concept. I mean, that, made perfect sense to me. But it was just this idea that by asking yourself a few questions and deciding what to do next, that you can vastly improve the quality of your life and continue this continual upward spiral of living in your genius zone and really truly enjoying your life, kind of like the top pyramid on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, how do you live up there is basically the premise of the book.
Nice.
Loved it. Highly recommend.
Cool. I'm getting down to the bottom of my list in terms of things that I just read at the perfect time and blew my mind. The next one is right on the fence. Right, it's just barely in that category. Well, there's two. I've got two left. One is Thinking in Bets, which we've talked about at length and had Annie on the show.
Mm-hmm. She's genius.
Yeah, and that one thing of want to bet, I said it on the show, that one concept, want to bet, that voice in my head radically altered at least the way I talk about things. So very big deal, but we already talked about that. The other one is one of those books that I recommend all the time to people who are allergic to sales or what they think sales is. And it's called The Secret of Selling Anything by Harry Brown. And it's an old book. I think it's from the 60s. I guess some of them we mentioned are from the 60s. But it is, if you hate doing sales, this is the book for you. It's short. It's fun. It's funny. And it's just right on. It's sort of, we talk about like a consultative sale, or like we've had plenty of episodes where we've talked about, if you're getting butterflies going to a sales meeting, you're doing it wrong, and those sorts of things. And this book, it's a little bit like it perfectly put words to the stuff I did in a air quotes sales meeting.
Yeah. It's like it gave you this framework or names to attach to this framework.
Yeah. For me, and at this point, I guess it's fair to say that it did change my life in the sense that I was getting to the point where I was starting to coach people when I read that book. And I was like, how do I get people to understand that used car salesmen are bad salesmen? Like they're bad at what they do, and that there's a way to do it good in a way that aligns with, a normal person's personality. So that was a very useful resource for me to put words and a framework around the concept. The way he starts off the book he's like, look, this book wouldn't, I'm completely paraphrasing, but it's like this, you wouldn't need this book if everyone had infinite time or money, but nobody has infinite time or money. Therefore, everyone is forced to make decisions constantly about how they spend their time and their money and other resources. And just the framing of it right up front, and then and just throughout the book, it's just great. It's great. It's like, for me, it's like, if you only read one sales book, this is the one. If you have a business, you better not be allergic to sales.
It's funny, as you were saying that, I couldn't help but think about what Annie Duke said on our show. There are two things that determine the quality of your life: luck and the quality of your decisions.
Decisions, right?
Yeah. I love that. Well, I only have one left too, so we're tracking here. And cool. I love learning about money. Like, it's just so fun to me. And I go down the rabbit hole on a regular basis with different kinds of money books. And I've read, I don't know, 50 maybe? I don't know. I've never counted, but I've read a lot. And there's one that I constantly recommend. I wish I had read it earlier. I really do. And it's called The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. And part of its appeal for me is that he kind of thinks like a soloist. And he's part of the FIRE financial, I forget what it stands for, but it's the retire early, financially independent retire early movement. But he's not like extreme. And he wrote this book. It started out, he had a blog, and it started out as a letter to his daughter as she was graduating from college. And it truly is simple. I mean, you would love it, Jonathan. It's like, you don't have to do very much with this. There's like 3 or 4 things and you're done. But
one simple trick.
Yeah. But it was funny because people have said, oh, I know you, like friends, I know you love to read about money. Like, what are your top books? And, sometimes I'll say, you know what? I think you just need to read one. Like, if you're not going to go down the rabbit hole because that's your thing, like Erica Goody's always reading a new money book, and I love to compare notes with her. But yeah, if you're only going to read one, I think this is the one. It's dramatically simplifying, and it just makes your life so much easier.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you're giving me more ideas. I'm afraid we're going to have to pull the plug pretty soon.
Listeners are going, oh, please, no, that's enough.
Yeah, that's
okay, you guys.
Well, I will point people to. So 2 things. One, I would love to hear dear listener, if you know how to find us, I would love to hear what books changed your life and why. What was the change? Like,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, I'd be really interested to hear that. But I don't know if you do this, Rochelle, but I maintain a list that I update on a somewhat regular basis, probably annually, of books that I think not everyone needs to read, but are on a range of business topics that if you are stuck on one of these things, this is like a book I give a huge thumbs up to.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things on there that, maybe you don't need, but they're all good. And if it is the thing you need, like Priya Parker's book, Art of Gathering, that was another one. It's just so good.
Yeah. And the other thing I love about her book is it's such a great example of how you can build authority as a consultant. And she doesn't really talk about her business model, but a little bit in the book, but you can kind of, infer from what she says how her business works. And it's such a great example of turning your expertise into an authority book.
Right.
Love it for the content. And I also love it for the demonstration of how you can do something like what she's done.
Right. Yeah. There's this one called The Authority Code some lady wrote. It's like
I heard about that one.
Yeah. So if you want to check that out, it's jonathanstark.com/reading list. But yeah, we were thinking it would be fun to kind of like go through the ones that changed our lives. And if nothing else, give you a glimpse into the insanity, the method behind the madness.
And there's plenty more. Like I was jotting down books when you said, all right, 10 minutes, right? And I was jotting some down and I didn't use them for a variety of reasons. But yeah, it's really hard to choose.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. That's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And we hope you join us again next time for The Business of Authority. Bye.
Bye-bye.